Siman Reish Mem Tes Siv Beis. We're gonna discuss the halachas of eating before Shabbos, a big meal, a small meal, snacking. What exactly is the story? Is this going to be permissible or not? How much? A lot to discuss on this topic. We're going to start from the Mishna Berurah. We'll start with the Shulchan Aruch over here first, and we'll work our way through. Also, Likvoya Be'erev Shabbos Sudo Umishta. It's prohibited to establish on the eve of Shabbos a Sudo Umishta, a meal and drinking. Seems like it's a combination of a lavish meal and alcoholic beverages. She'eno rogil b'yimei hachol. Something that you don't regularly do during the week. This is a very large meal. V'afilu hisudus eirison, even if it is a meal to celebrate an engagement. Try not to time that it gets done on Friday, on the eve of Shabbos, Erev Shabbos. V'mnei kavod haShabbos she'yikonis l'Shabbos kishehu to'ev la'echol. This is in honor of Shabbos, in order that you'll enter into Shabbos when you have a desire to eat. Excuse me. B'chol hayoim b'chlal ha'isra, and the entire day is included in this prohibition. The entire day you can't have this very lavish meal. Usu'udo shizmana erev Shabbos, and regarding a meal that the time of the meal is on eve of the Shabbos itself. So we are differentiating between over here a meal which could be postponed versus something that has to be specifically on Erev Shabbos. Kigon, for example, a bris milah, a pidyon haben, mutter kein nirali v'haminag pasha. That will be permissible, and that appears to me is the halacha and is the obvious custom. So if it's something that is time sensitive, you could do it. V'lechel v'lishto is another category. Let's say you're going to eat and drink bli kviya sudo, without a full-fledged established meal, which means it's not a massive, lavish, and excessive meal. Afilu suda shadogil b'chol, even if it's a meal that you typically eat during the week. Kol hayoy mutter lahaskel min adin. The entire day is permissible to begin with that from the letter of the law. Which means the entire day you could be involved with such a suda. Aval mitzvah lihimone melakvoyo suda shenog ba b'chol metesha shalosamal. However, there's a mitzvah to refrain from establishing a meal that you have the custom to do in the week from 9 hours and onwards. Let's just get a brief recap over here. We have several cases. Number one, there's a prohibition of having a very, very lavish meal, even the entire day, a very, very large meal that you're not used to at all. It's an atypical type of meal. That the entire day is a problem. However, and even if it's for someone got engaged. However, if it's a meal that is time sensitive, for example, milah has to be done eighth day, even we'll see, even if it's a nidcha, we'll learn about that. Or if it's a pidyon haben, that's going to be permissible. Because it's a specific time when the meal is. What about having a meal that is not very, very large? It's like a weekday type of meal. You could do that the entire day. However, from 9 halachic hours into the day and onwards, that would be a problem. It's a mitzvah to refrain from doing so.
Sounds like it.
Look at the Mishna Berurah.
Then you'd be allowed 9.5 hours in a day, he's saying.
9 hours?
After 9.5 hours, sounds like minadin, it would be okay.
9 hours? Nekar adin, but it's a mitzvah to refrain from it. Look at the Mishna Berurah over here. 9 hours. We're going to come to that. Mishna Berurah over here in Yud Zayin says, "Mikol makom niro to be a mois hachoyref bizman shayamim kesodim oir mitzvah yimana melekvo yasuda haragila." Nevertheless, during the winter, when the days are very short, there's a mitzvah to refrain from having a meal that you're used to even before 9 hours. 9 halachic hours into the day. Kol shu mishar benafsho, as long as you estimate that through eating you won't have a desire to eat at night. So we see that the minimum is 9 hours, but sometimes you should even go earlier. Because it's all about having the appetite over here, and you're not going to have that appetite. in the winter when it's shorter. So you have to be very careful from that. The Be'er Halacha specifies this is talking about you're eating bread kedei sevia kirigilusa b'chol. This is talking about you're eating a large quantity enough that you will be satisfied from that quantity that you are eating and that you typically eat during the weekday. Aval ma'at mahashkit ra'avoino ye'inu b'chlal kaviyah suda. But someone who's eating a little just to silence his hunger, so to say, it's not included in this category, and that would be permissible. So you have to know why you're eating and how much are you eating. Are you eating just a little? Are you eating just a lot? There would be an obvious difference. The next Be'er Halacha discusses, even though you have to calculate the halachic hours of the day, which we called sha'od zmaniyos, that's when the day is not very short, but when it's short, and you definitely won't have a desire to eat at night after a regular meal that you eat, that won't be better than if you were in Istanis, where we hold in Hilchos Pesach and Simin Tuf Ayin, Siv Gimel. You were very finicky, as well as Simin Tuf Ayin Aleph in Hilchos Pesach, Sif Aleph in the Ramad, that we have to be stringent in that scenario. Even though seemingly we would be more stringent over there because you want to go into Pesach with an appetite because matzah is more stringent, that means there's no obligation. But nevertheless, there would still be a mitzvah. Even though someone who is very sensitive doesn't need to fast on the eve of Shabbos, unless you're going to do it beyond the letter of the law. Talking about a full-fledged fast, unlike over here. It's a mitzvah to refrain. We'll come back to where they got exactly 9 hours from. The Mishna Berurah in Tezayin says, by the way, if you began a meal, you don't need to stop. If you began it before 9 hours, you could actually continue afterwards. That's what he wants to say over there. So you have that leniency that you could bank on. The Mishna Berurah in Tezvav says, Hainu kamoy va'afilu. Even a meal that you regularly have during the week, the entire day, you could have that. Or return by meaning to say, it goes without saying, for sure, if you're not establishing a meal at all, that will be permissible the entire day. And even there's not even a mitzvah to refrain from such a endeavor over there, from such a concept. Even when it comes to establishing a meal, since you're not doing a wide meal, rather you're doing just what you're used to during the week.
Yeah, what does it mean on top?
Hold on, let's just finish. Even establishing a meal over here, since you're not doing a wide meal like you regularly do during the week, it's permissible the entire day. Maker adin from the letter of the law, mitzvah liyamana, but there's a mitzvah to refrain. So the Mishna Berurah answers the question that we had before, which is it's permissible technically min hadin from the letter of the law the entire day. It's preferable you should refrain from it. What was the question?
So he says, Balik via Suda, right?
Yeah.
Now, anytime you're sitting down with bread, you're being Kovea Suda.
No. We saw already a distinction between that and this Be'er Halacha that's highlighted right over here. We saw the difference if you are being satisfied, if it's Kedei Sevilla and satiated, versus if you're just eating a little bit to silence your hunger. Your stomach's making noises, you're so hungry. There's a difference between the two. Remember, the idea over here isn't we don't want you making the bracha of amotzi. The idea is we don't want you filling up your tank and not having room for.
In the usual parlance of halacha, when you say kaveh suda, you're talking about sitting down with either mazonos or bread.
That's what we're talking about. So that's what we're talking about, a large quantity. That you're going to be satisfied. If you're just having a little, that's fine.
You always have to wash bread, and when you're eating bread, you're kaveh suda.
No. There's a difference between if a person's going to sit down and eat half a piece of rye bread versus if the guy's going to sit down and eat 3 pieces with butter and eggs. It's a difference. You're eating an eighth less.
I understand
Yeah.
practically, but halachically, you Kaveh Sudi, you get to make
Halachically.
a
That's not what
bench.
we were referring to Kaviyah Suda.
I understand. So I'm
Being
saying,
Kaviyah Suda has nothing to do with are you going to be saying an Alamichi or benching. It has to do with the quantity that you are consuming.
don't we use that lashon by in terms of how?
Yes, but don't confuse other halachas with this.
Okay, I'm just saying that if
Pasaba bekisnin, don't talk about you
right,
need to
but
say amotzi, you need to mention it's a different halacha.
where you are in
The
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 area,
reason for that is already something else.
so he's using it in a different way.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's what
okay.
we're talking
So I
about.
want okay,
Via Suda, the idea is you want to go into Shabbos with an appetite,
understood. Okay.
right? Like the Shulchan Aruch over here says, go in with an appetite. Let's go in order now of everything we skipped. Also, Lakvaya. Visa Gemara, the Gemara in Gittin says, Lavan Ches, Tais Mishpach, B'Yushalayim, Shkavu, Sudos, B'Rev, Shabbos, V'Nekra. There was a family that they had established a very, very large meal, the way that we're learning. On the eve of Shabbos, they were uprooted, they died. B'Erev Shabbos, V'Hu Adin, B'Erev Yontif. The Yom Tov Nami Mitzvah La'ango L'Kavdo. By the way, all these halachas also apply on Erev Yontif. Before Yontif, also there's a mitzvah of Oneg and Kavod Shabbos, of pleasure in Shabbos and honoring Shabbos. Same exact idea over here. The Be'er Halacha says you're talking about a Suda Kavua, set meal over here. The second Be'er Halacha says if you're very wealthy, Bimu Asher B'Yoyser V'Yoyser B'Kol Yoyim Suda Rachavim Kol Shabbos. Every single day you have large meals. I would say this applies to many Jews nowadays. You have large meals during the week, just like on Shabbos. Guess what? Don't do that on Erev Shabbos. In order that you go into Shabbos with an appetite. Then he says, look at Simin Reish Peiches Sif Zion. And the Ramah, this type of person needs to make a change to his meal on Shabbos. He needs to do something that will demonstrate that it's better and different than the meals that he typically has during the week. Have more dishes, whatever you're going to do. The Mishna Berurah in Os Taz explains a Suda of Eirisid. Perish explanation is Im Eiris Koidim Lachain Alser Laso Isa Suda Be'er Shabbos. If you did an Eirisin beforehand, it's prohibited an engagement. It's prohibited to make the Suda, the meal, on Erev Shabbos. Even though that this type of meal is in fact a mitzvah, nevertheless you should have done it earlier. Aval im edus berev Shabbos mutar lasois suda. But if you did the edisin on the eve of Shabbos, it's permissible to make a meal. If the actual engagement was on Erev Shabbos, then you can make the meal then as well. The Kevan de Edisin, Shardia Erev Shabbos, since we allow engagements on Erev Shabbos, Mishum Shalo Yaki Menu Acher, in order that someone else won't propose to your fiance. Mamela Shari Hasauda Gamkin. So therefore, naturally, consequently, we permit a meal for this as well. And this has the importance of a meal for Mila and Pidyon Haben, which the time is set. And similarly, if the nisu and if the wedding is on the eve of Shabbos, it's permissible to do a meal then as well. Nevertheless, preferably it's correct, it's good and correct. If it's possible to push off this meal the next day or even for another day, even if the engagement was on Erev Shabbos itself. And you should know, the Kolz Besuda Seyudasin, this is all discussing a meal for the engagement. Aval Besuda Sha'oisin B'Shiduchim, but when it comes to meals that you're going to do for Shiduchim, Shalanu, for the matches that we make, Lo Havi Sudos Mitzvah. Matchmaking, pairing people up, that is not considered a meal that which is a mitzvah. King Kosev Prima Godim, that's what the Prima Godim writes in some tough Mem Dalad, Lefiza according to this. Ein La Soise Berev Shabbos, Afilu Im Nigmar Hashidich V'Osayim. You shouldn't do it on Erev Shabbos, even if it was completed the shidduch on that day. Even if the match setting up was finished on that day. Umashino, you shouldn't make the meal then. Erev Shabbos. Umashino hogan lechol mini merkachas b'shas ksivas otanoim lo mikri sud. If you're just eating what's called mini merkachas during the writing of the Tanoim, that's not called a suda. Kachas, I'm assuming, is a type of mezonos item. Kavod Shabbos. This is going on the Shulchan Aruch said, even if you're having a meal for the engagement, you shouldn't do that because it's going to be if it's a very, very large meal in honor of Shabbos. You want to go into Shabbos when you have an appetite. This is straight out of the Magen Avram's playbook. That's what the Magen Avram says. Some write that time the reason for this law is you're going to be preoccupied and burdened with the meal. You will not be involved with the needs of Shabbos. Sheyikanis to Shabbos, you want to enter into Shabbos. Sha'av sha'oichlu b'boiker, even though you're going to eat in the morning. Kivan shu marbe besuda, so since you are increasing your meal, shaloi kirigiluso, in a way that you don't regularly do. Shuv lo yoichel b'layla l'te'avon. So then you're not going to eat at night with an appetite. The idea over here is, even if you're having it earlier in the day, if you're going to have a massive meal, you won't have an appetite. If Shabbos starts 4:30, 5:30, and you're going to, and 5:30 you'll start eating. So if you had
like 2:30,
something, if you had something at 11 o'clock, whatever, you got to be careful. A bris mila yud beis afilu im eino b'shmini lilidasa. We're discussing over here, even if the bris itself isn't on the 8th day. Kegon, for example, shayachoyle b'shmini v'nidchis. Let's say the newborn was sick on the 8th day and it got pushed off. It was a nidche. Got pushed off to be later. Mikol makom, nevertheless, mikri's manakavu, it's still considered a set time. The kol shaisa v'shaisus manehu. Every single time when you could potentially do it is considered its time. It's prohibited to leave someone uncircumcised even for a duration of one day. And similarly, when it comes to pidyon haben, redeeming the firstborn, even if the time passed. Nevertheless, since from the letter of the law, even after 30 days, which is after the time of pidyon haben, every single moment it's placed upon you the obligation to redeem him. So therefore, naturally be permissible to do the meal as well. Yud Gimel, it would be permissible for the meal or the pidyon haben. The higam kain sudas mitzvah. This is also a meal which is considered a mitzvah. Don't push it off because of the Shabbos meal. When we call makom, nevertheless, lechatchila mitzvah lahagdimo b'shachrim mishum kavod Shabbos. Nevertheless, lechatchila, there's a mitzvah to do it earlier in the morning, because out of honor of Shabbos. K'moshe mavur b'simin tafrei sadiyesif beis l'nyan sudas put him Erev Shabbos, like it's explained over there. Ubidi avid yochol la'asoiso afilu l'minchu l'mala. Bidi avid, post facto, it's permissible to do it even from mincha and onwards.
We were talking about Sudas Parah, talking about the Sudas Mitzvah here.
So this is going on Purim. First, it's discussing the mitzvah. You should do it earlier, just like Purim. So by Purim, you have to be careful not to do it too late. Should preferably do it earlier. That's the idea over here. Question is, does this also apply to the Mila and the Pidyon Haben? Usually it's not so practical because we do it in the morning anyways. Because there's a reason Magdim the mitzvahs, you want to be quick to do mitzvahs. We'll have to see when we look at those Vahadar, how they learn this. Those Vahadar Mishna Berurah. What about for eating and drinking without a Suda? The Ein Bechlal Zeh Mishna Berurah over here. Im hu shoysa kol kachar b'mini mashka ad shiseva. This isn't talking about if you're going to drink a lot of beverages until you're going to be satiated. Ki hu bevade mekalkel taivas amachal v'hachush yoyed al zeh. Because this will certainly ruin the desire for food, and the senses could testify on this. When people drink, they typically don't eat. L'pamim yuchol lehivat al yedei shechruso mesuda Shabbos lagamri, and sometimes you're able to nullify yourself completely due to the intoxicating beverages that you drank during the meal. Therefore, be a mitzvah to refrain from this from 9 hours and above, which there is no explanation on the 9 hours over here. We'll have to learn that in the next session as to where specifically 9 got. But for now, we are going to tackle a very important Ber Halacha. The Ber Halacha over here, we're going to do the longer one over here. But first, let's take a look at this Ber Halacha where he quotes the Pri Megadim. He says the reason for this prohibition of having an incredibly large meal the entire day, one that you typically don't have during the week, it's very, very big meal, or just eating in general, is not so that you could enter into Shabbos with an appetite, not like what the Shulchan Aruch said. Rather, the main primary reason is because you're going to be mezalzel b'zeh kavod Shabbos sho'iser of Shabbos shava b'zeh liyimei haShabbos. You are belittling the honor of Shabbos because you're making the eve of Shabbos, erev Shabbos, equivalent to Shabbos itself, and therefore you're belittling Shabbos. The next small Ber Halacha, this perhaps is one of the easiest Ber Halachas out of every single Ber Halacha in Orach Chaim. V'hu hadin b'siyum mesechta. The same halacha applies to making a siyum on a mesechta. If you're making a celebration because you finished a mesechta, that would be in the same category as the pidyon haben. Mutter, it's going to be permissible. This is referring to the halacha said that the mila and the pidyon haben would be permissible. Look at the Magen Avram quoting the Lavush. Look at the Magen Avram quoting the Lavush. Im efshel lakayim shtehen mutov. If you're able to do both, then great. V'im lav tidacha suda Shabbos. If you can't do both, push off the Shabbos meal. What does this mean? What does this Lavush mean? Meaning to say, you're not going to be able to have the Suda, the Shabbos meal at all at night, because Achilas Gasa. Achilas Gasa means overeating. Even so, you don't need to worry. Since right now you are involved with the Sudas mitzvah, you're involved with the very lavish Pidyon Ben Mila, don't worry about it. We can't say perform the mitzvah that you're doing now worse because you're thinking about a mitzvah that's going to happen later on. No, do the mitzvah you're supposed to, kedasa, kedin, according to halacha right now that you're involved with. If you have no appetite on Shabbos night, don't eat Shabbos night. Have 3 meals the next day, as we learned in Siman, Kemoshe Kasafti Siman Reish Ayin Daled. Beer Pri Megadim Kavanah. So this is the Pri Megadim explains the intention of the Lavush as well.
Was that the case like a guy like slept all Friday night or something like that, or he was sick Friday night?
No. He attended a lavish bris.
No, I didn't say
a lavish Pidyon
Ben.
Yeah, something happened, whatever. No. We learned about that. The truth is, I was going to comment on that. I think Reish Ayin Daled isn't even the correct place for it. I think it's more of a Reish Ayin Aleph topic, from what I remember at least. So I think that's an interesting quote over there. But again, there's only one way to fact check it. You look it up. However, Mikra Hadin, the halacha is you need to look into this a lot. Is it not true that the meal at night is an obligation from the letter of the law? don't even know how to watch their own kids over there. Rookies. It's always the people with one or two kids that have the crying kids. Once you get four, that's it. Yeah, four also. Yeah, it depends if you're a rookie or a pro. So, anyways, this is the idea over here, which is what? You have to look into this. Because the Suda on Shabbos night is a choiva mesaradin, it's a full-fledged obligation. Masha'in came the Suda's bris milah, unlike the Suda of a milah, and a pidyon ben ein ela mitzvah v'lo chiyuv klal. Unlike the meal for a meal or a pidyon ben, it's just a mere mitzvah, it's not an obligation.
So, right, I guess
Okay.
the actual mitzvah is the meal of the Pidyon Ben itself.
That's right.
The Suda is just.
Look at this. This is a shocker. It's not a chiyuv at all. You got to go back to Simon Reish Samach Daled in your day over there. I think it's Reish Samach Daled, that area, Hilchos Mila. Never went to Hilchos Mila? Simon Shin and Hilchos Pidyon Ben. How could a person not learn those Simonim? I'm just kidding. The point is what? You have to look over there. To say that it's a mitzvah, ba'alma, it's a mere mitzvah, and it's not a chiyuv, not an obligation. It's a, yeah, we're not talking about a 613 over here. We're talking about at least the Rabbanan to be categorized as an obligation. It's a chiddush of the Be'er Halacha. V'im kein im meshar shal yedei achiloso yizbatel lagamri mesudas laila yesh limonam hazeh. Consequently, if that's so, if a person estimates that through eating at the pidyon ben of the milah, he will nullify completely from the Shabbos meal at night, he should refrain from the Suda. He should, in fact, refrain from that meal of the pidyon ben of the milah. Mishulchan Aruch in shum raya klal. You can't bring a proof from the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch only allowed if through this you're not going to eat at night with an appetite. But you're not going to completely nullify the Suda itself. Also, if the reason for the prohibition of establishing a meal is because you're going to be belittling Shabbos, this isn't considered belittling at all. Because you're having a Suda's mitzvah right now. You're having a meal which is a mitzvah. Or you're not going to be able to prepare for Shabbos properly. So for a meal that was a mitzvah, they weren't stringent about that. And we said at least you'll have kasa daharna, so you'll have some fried fish, you'll have something, you don't need to prep that much. Mashenkin, conversely, if through this, it's going to be at night achilas gasa. If you're going to be overeating at night and you're not really hungry, guess what? Over when you're eating when you're not really hungry is not even halachically considered eating. If you're totally full. And then it's logical to say that you should refrain from eating a lot in order that you won't come to this. This is a fascinating concept of should I look into the future and therefore it should change what I'm doing right now in the mitzvah that I'm doing for a greater mitzvah, or don't worry about it. Right now I have a mitzvah in front of me. Afterwards I found, says the Be'er Halacha, this in the Teres Akanim. He holds that also you should be very careful from eating so much in a way that you're going to come to now not having your meal on Shabbos, your Suda on Shabbos.
He's saying
even though he was stringent, aka that Teres Akanim, if you're eating and you're going to be totally satiated and full, there's no source for that, but at least when it comes to eating and drinking in a way that you're going to come to nullify the meal completely at night, for sure you should refrain from that. And then he says, and you should know this point, that which the Magen Avram quotes the Bach, that it's a mitzvah to begin before 8 hours, before 9 hours into the day. That's explained in Hilchos Purim, Siman Tafrei Sadihei in the Ramah, regarding the Purim meal, if it falls out Purim on Shabbos, like we just had this past year. He says that it's a wonderment that he quotes it, the Magen Avram quotes it in the Bach, this halacha. It's also clear from the Gra, it's obvious as well. So b'diavad, certainly after the fact, you could do the Yersuda for Purim even from Mincha and above. That's why this past Purim, I didn't care that most people were doing the Suda later. I said, no, I saw what the Mishna Berurah over there says. I saw what the postscript over there said. Better to have it before Chatzos. I know about this if I'm not messing around. And that's a big Suda.
The Rub finished before Chatzos also?
No, started. We're talking started. That's what we're talking about. Started. Okay. But when the people are starting later on, when are they finishing? Finishing an hour before Shabbos? Come on, what's your Shabbos food gonna look like? I'll tell you what it's gonna look like. A lot of leftover food. That's what it's gonna look like. This next point of the Be'er Halacha, it's unfortunate that we only have a little bit of time left, but I think we will be able to properly finish this. I would like to do it all inside. This is a fundamental Be'er Halacha and it cannot be overlooked, and maybe we will do it again because it is so crucial. Why don't we do Kiddush in Shul at night and people eat mazonos, people have challah at night? Well, why not? The answer is this Be'er Halacha. There's a very important Darchei Moshe. He quotes the Or Zarua. He says that there's a mitzvah to eat your Sudav Shabbos with an appetite, your Shabbos meal. Since the main meal is bread, therefore it's prohibited to eat grimzel on Shabbos before your Suda. Grimzel is a type of mezoinus. You're not allowed to have that on Shabbos before the meal, because then you're not going to have your meal with an appetite. The question is the Rama talking about in the world of yakis, like we learned in Hilchos Kiddush, where you're washing first, then you're going to have your grimzel, and then you're going to have your bread? Or is he even talking about what we do? Just making a regular kiddush, and then eating some mazonos, say bracha achron, and then you eat your suda later. The Rama himself, surprisingly, the Darchei Moshe argues on this, and says that we hold that you could eat the entire day. Even from mincha time and onwards, until it gets dark, you could eat. So we see we're not worried about the appetite. The Magen Avram agrees with the Or Zarua, even though we hold like Rabbi Yosi in the Gemara Psachim over there on Sadi Testament Beis, who says it's permissible to eat until it gets dark, not like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that you have to stop when mincha comes in so that you can go into Shabbos with an appetite. That's only because you don't want to be stringent when it's still day because of the concern of appetite. However, once the time for the Suda comes in, Rabbi Yosi would agree there's a mitzvah to eat it with an appetite. Look at Taisus over there. If that's so, since the main meal is lechem, im kain, kevan she'ikra suduhu lechem ein lechel grimzel or shar mezoinus ki hagavna koidim kadei she'etoiv lechel. Since the main meal is bread, don't eat the grimzel or any other mezoinus.
On Friday night.
Yep. Before, in order that you could go into your meal with an appetite.
Now, you're by your Shabbos table.
Yeah.
Before you eat the bread, that's what he's talking about?
No. He's just talking about in general. Remember, he's going in the world of Rabbi Yossi. He's saying, no, from Mincha now. From Mincha, you have to be careful with the appetite business. Even though Rabbi Yossi says you can go the whole way. Just like from Mincha Lamal, according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is where the 9 hours came from. He's talking about Mincha Ketana, 9 hours. Is Mincha Ketana, Samach Mincha. Knew the time of Mincha.
Samach was 9.5.
That's right. That's right. This is the intention of the Magen Avram. Afterwards, I found this in the Machasis Shekel. He explains like what I just said. Magen Avram, people them, and in places where they wash their hands before Kiddush. So you can tell before he wasn't talking about when you're washing your hands before Kiddush. In places where you're washing your hands before Kiddush, it's obvious that it's prohibited to eat this grimzel or mazonos before Hamotzi, that it's not going to constitute as an interruption between washing and Hamotzi. Furthermore, you're going to cause a bracha shein esricha, an extra unnecessary bracha. Furthermore, it's prohibited to say the bracha b'reimin and mazonos before Hamotzi. And then he says, "V'hine in our places where we don't do such a thing, we don't wash our hands before Kiddush. Nahagu ha'olim lahakel b'shachris. The custom is to be lenient in the morning. But look at what he says. Nahagu ha'olim lahakel. It's a custom to be lenient and have Kiddush at shul. We have to tie this into our notes that we learned.
We learned before.
When we learned in Hilchos Kiddush. Exactly, this is where it is. The custom is to be lenient, like the Darchei Moshe, like the Rama, to eat mazonos after Kiddush before your Suda. This is talking about in Shul. You have Kiddush, you have Challah, you have Kugel. It's a leniency. Mm-hmm. Look at the Shulchan Aruch Hagon Rav Zalman. That's the Shulchan Aruch Harav Lubavitcher Rebbe, who defends this custom and writes, don't protest those who are lenient. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, there are men of great deeds who are stringent on themselves. In a place where it's possible, like the Magen Avram, there are people who are stringent, men of great deeds who are stringent, in a place where it's possible to go like the Magen Avram, and immediately after Kiddush, they wash their hands and then they make the bracha on the challah and they eat it all during the Suda. And that's what the Sefer Shulchan Aruch Shittim says. Al kol panim l'kul yom v'nachal lahader shel lamalei kritzu mishar achilus kodem Suda shapas. Whichever way you go, even if you go with this leniency, it is correct according to everyone. According to everyone, it is correct to be careful not to fill your stomach up from other food before your Suda that you're going to have, before your meal you're going to have in Shabbos Nechal, especially your wife cooked for you. You got to enjoy it. Very important per halacha.
Especially tied into what we learned before, the notes of it.
Yeah, with the Kiddush.
Because we saw it.
This is tremendous amount of insight. It's amazing to see where the Chafetz Chaim puts this. He doesn't put this anywhere in the Mishna Berurah. He doesn't put this idea in a quick, short little Be'er Halacha. He puts it in this big, long Be'er Halacha.
But doesn't
he knows that someone who can learn a Be'er Halacha with this, in the right way, with all the lumdis and understand it, he's ready to hear this information. A regular person ain't ready.
Isn't that information in the Mishna Berurah where we learned it before?
Nope.
In terms of Shano, he never says.
No, not in the Mishna Berurah.
He never says that you shouldn't do kiddush.
Nope.
Okay.
Where did he say that where did he say this in any Mishna Berurah?
I thought it was in the Mishna Berurah that we learned. Yeah. It was all Bir Halacha.
There's another Bir Halacha in Hilchos Kiddush, a shorter one, where he quotes the Vilna Gaon, who says that he would never have a Kiddush in Shul. He would always go straight into his meal because he held in Kiddush al Makom Suda means the Kiddush you're going to make is only going to be in the place where your meal is going to be. What is the real meal? Your real meal is on challah, on bread. That's what the first Kiddush should be on.
That was only Bir Halacha.
That was another Bir Halacha. That was a short one. And he just quoted the Vilna Gaon. Over here, he's speaking it out more. He's saying, look, it's a leniency. Men of great deed, don't do this. Anshe Maisa. But don't protest people who are doing this. But if you're giving a shir, I'm not protesting. I'm just giving a shir over here. We're just learning here. All right.
Yes, Shikaya.
Good stuff. Everyone should have a wonderful day. It's a Shem tomorrow will be Mamshech.